Before he was aware, David Irving was destined to become a percussionist. It appears that his musical journey was laid out before him like a map. David takes us on his journey from playing his first drum set to becoming a lifelong musician in the United States Navy. Don't miss this fascinating conversation. David Irving is next on OTP.
All right, David. Thanks so much for coming on OTP. We do appreciate it. How you doing today?
I'm great. It's such a pleasure to be here. Been listening to some of the other episodes, and it's great.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
You know, music is just so gratifying for all of us that listen and enjoy this gift and play, and to hear you play. So let's just dive right into it. First of all, where are you from?
Well, complicated question. I was born in New York, in Park Slope in Brooklyn. I can't though. I can't use New York as the place where I'm from because we moved from there before I was 1. So I just tell people I'm from Maryland. That's the short answer. From Rockville, Maryland, just outside of DC.
Okay, there you go. Now, is that where you got your first taste of percussion or music, wanting to play? How did that work?
It is. So like I said, we moved before I was 1, and that's where I spent my whole childhood, in Montgomery County. All of my school and friendships and everything was all there. So yeah, that's where it all happened. That's where it all started.
Okay, so now was that through the public school system that you got into playing drums, or?
It was. So I went to elementary school, and at the school I was in, when you were in 4th grade, you could audition to be in the school band, the instrumental music. All the students were in the vocal general program, just like they are today at most elementary schools. But for my school, instrumental music happened starting in 4th grade.
That's cool.
My best friend at the time wanted to audition for percussion. And so he convinced me to do that with him. I don't know if it was a friendship thing or if he was messing with me or whatever it was.
Right.
So I begrudgingly agreed to audition for percussion with him. And when I showed up to the audition, he was there. However, he was holding a euphonium, not drumsticks.
He switched on you.
He switched on me, but I do feel like I have the last laugh because here I am,
right,
years later, still playing. So
I wonder if he's playing at all.
I don't know. I lost touch with him during high school, and I'm not sure. But
right, yeah, interesting. So now, how did you feel about the at that point, if you can remember that far back? I know it's a while, but did the percussion, the drum set, just grab you, or the rhythm? What made you think, hey, this is something I like?
It wasn't until about a year into it where I really felt self-motivation to continue. So I started in 4th grade. The summer between 4th and 5th grade, my parents bought my first drum set for me for my birthday, my 10th birthday.
Right.
It was a black 5-piece precision drum set, and we bought it at the Washington Music Center, Chuck Levin's. And it was, it was awesome. It was just, I walked into the store and there it was, and there was like a choir. And
you fell in love. Yeah.
Oh, it was great. And so I got my drum set, and before that it was just the student kit of a snare drum and a bell set, a practice pad, and learning how to play hot cross buns and learning how to read music and all that stuff. And once I got the drum set, it's like something became unlocked. I wasn't beholden to reading. I could listen to an album and just hit things, and it was a completely different approach that I wasn't exposed to before. My parents didn't play. They weren't musical. They were as children, but not since having me.
Right.
And I don't have any siblings. I was an only child. Okay. However, I have a cousin who lives in New York, and at the time lived in New York, and he was, an amateur musician, gigging musician, recording. He had his own band called Youngster, and they were this like alternative rock group that I just loved listening to. And I idolized my cousin, and he was, I think he's 16 years older than me, and it was just, that role model. I didn't have it at home, right? And he played drums, and so I got my first drum set. My cousin came down from New York. He gave me a couple pointers, and I was off and running. I was able to get my hands on whatever album I could and listen to what they were doing, and go from there. So I spent a lot of time listening to Red Hot Chili Peppers was a big one. Chad Smith, Good Charlotte, Three Doors Down, REM.
Yes.
And then we might talk about it later, but some music from the 70s and 80s, like the Eagles and Boston and Michael Jackson, all that kind of stuff. Just teaching myself and learning different things and training my ears.
That's I want to go back to your parents for a minute now, because what are the names? So let's give a shout out to mom and dad.
Yeah, mom and dad. So again, another complicated question where it shouldn't be. Mom and dad got divorced when I was young. I was too young to remember.
Okay.
And through all of that hardship and heartache that it must have been for them, for me, it was almost a blessing.
Yeah.
They got divorced and mom got remarried. And so my dad, Neil, and my mom, Lauren, were still able to co-parent me, even though they were divorced.
Okay.
And so, I always tell people, like, the term parent for me means many people, not two people.
Yeah.
And so I had, my stepfather, Roger, when I was really young. And then I have now my stepmother, Beth, and all of them have been extremely supportive.
Yeah.
And I also have to shout out to my late grandmother, Lucille, who was maybe the most supportive of all of them.
I love it.
Yeah. And she, there was a period of time where we were living with her, and she allowed me to set my drum set up in her basement and just play whenever I wanted to. And, have, my friends over to jam or whatever in the basement. And she was all about it. So,
yeah, that's what I was getting at is you're right. It takes a village, and they all came to support something that you were starting to love.
They sure did. They all rallied behind me. And, I never felt like I had to battle to love this thing.
Yeah.
It was just easy.
Yes.
So
what a way to start and to have that nurturing support system. And then for them to see where you are, reap the benefits and see where you are now. That is great. So now you're moving on, and I don't want to go too fast here because I find it all these episodes fascinating to see how the seed is planted for music, and then the instrument and people navigate. Who were some of the people besides you talked about your cousin? Were there band directors in your life that were bringing you forward? How did that work?
Yeah. So, you talk to professional musicians, and they always tell you about their musical idols that are in the industry, right? People that they've listened to or followed, or the history of, whatever other famous musician there was. For me, I never really experienced that. I'm going to start with my grandmother. So she was just, one of the icons of my life in almost all aspects. But one aspect was her love of learning, and she was always learning. She was into her 70s and I think even 80s, was auditing classes at the local community college and just sitting and learning. And she would sit, in the afternoons and do her crossword puzzles and listen to whatever. What sticks out in my mind is frequently Italian opera, a lot of Italian opera.
Wow.
And a lot of Gypsy Kings. And so she always had some, music playing. and seeing that, I think, had a big impact on me.
Sure.
And, my father likewise loves learning things, and he would always listen to talk radio or something on the radio that was always talking about some musician from somewhere in the world,
right?
Whether it was someone who was known or not known. Mm-hmm. And I just remember hearing, musicians from Africa or from Asia or something on these talk shows, sure, talking about their unique instruments or their unique perspectives. And
yes,
of course, that had a big impact on me.
Right.
I also had one of my uncles who lived very close to me, is a scientist, a retired scientist now. And he was very into music. I know he was into all kinds of music, but what sticks in my head is Jimi Hendrix a lot.
Okay.
And I remember him showing me Fire for the first time, and and the drum part on that. And it was just everywhere I went, there was always, a welcoming of music also.
Yeah.
And it was just a warm part of my life that I could go to
Sure.
all the time. And so going from there, from my early childhood, in fifth grade, I had a vocal general teacher who was incredible. She started this program for the fifth graders called Fabulous Flying Fingers. And the reason she called it that is because we would do our little fifth grade, vocal concerts, choir concerts, and along with it, we would sign in American Sign Language the words that we were singing.
That's beautiful.
And it was beautiful. And it was, I will always remember having that. And the name is, as silly as it is, it really sticks in my mind. It was sure, really a wonderful thing. And she was the first music educator I can remember in my life that opened that world for me, the world of music as communication.
Yes.
And so moving on from that, I was fortunate enough to be in a school district where music was really strong. And my middle school band director, Miss Vrooman, was, lauded as a wonderful music teacher, recognized as such in the district, and, giving us every opportunity that we could have. And so we had multiple concert bands, we had talent shows, we had jazz band, all that kind of stuff in middle school. And
right.
And she was good at teaching all of it. And she was really good at relating to the students, and we all, were able to rally around her and believe in what she was doing. Yeah. From there, maybe my biggest inspiration to this day, I met in 8th grade, and he graduated the University of Maryland. And his first teaching job was at my middle school, the second semester, my last semester of 8th grade. And I met him. His name is Phil Barnes. He is now the instrumental supervisor for Montgomery County. So if you want to become an instrumental music teacher in Montgomery County, you interview with him.
Okay. Yeah.
And he also marches in the Baltimore Ravens marching band, and he has a sax quartet, and he's doing all this stuff.
That's great.
Yeah. So I met him, the latter part of my 8th grade year, and the following year I was going to high school. And that job, that high school band director job, was opening at the same time. Oh. And so Phil interviewed and got that job. So his first year of teaching high school was my first year of high school. Right. And, I felt a strong bond to him because of that. And he really took that program, which was already, a pretty decent program, and just, expounded it, and it just blew up into this amazing thing. Yeah. Because he just put his whole heart and soul into it. And I saw him doing that. Yeah. And through his knowledge and his abilities, I was able to find something to aspire to and inspiration. Sure. Yeah. And so in high school, I was afforded all the same opportunities as middle school, just, on the next level. And so jazz band, concert bands, orchestras, marching band world opened up big for me. Yeah. And that was through Phil. And so, from there I can keep going, but every rung of the ladder, every step of life, there was someone else who I found a newfound inspiration and a newfound, yeah, we'll stick with inspiration
Yeah.
for music, and to just keep continuing and keep going.
A couple of things on that note. Number one, even though you had these powerful um, angels in your life that were feeding you this and nurturing you, you were also receptive. I mean, if it wasn't for who you are, I mean, you have to have a kid that is receptive to what they're hearing, people talking to you. So, kudos to
Sure.
you as well at
And
that age.
I'm gonna credit my grandmother with that. Seeing
Yeah.
her learn and seeing her take in all of these things and
Right on.
receive different musics, it made it easy.
Yeah.
She was a model for that, and it was easy for me to catch
That's
on
great.
To that, so.
And to open up her home and to allow you the freedom to, have that opportunity to play and try and have mistakes and have people come in, and that whole freedom just made who you are now, not only as a musician, but a person.
Absolutely.
What a gift. Yeah, that's a great story. I love it. As you were talking, I was having visions in my mind of a movies, as you're going through it. Yeah. So now, did I hear that it's right that at age 15, you start working with conducting and theory classes? Is that right?
Yes. So, going into high school and being such a big part, well, I won't say that I was a big part, but the music program was a big part of me.
Sure.
And, there were so many things I was involved in. And at age 15, I was able to get involved with conducting and arranging and theory because I was a little bit ahead with the credits that I needed to graduate.
That's great.
So the electives that I chose, of course, at this point in my life were music electives.
Right.
I could hang out with Phil a little bit more. I could develop my skills more. And so being a senior in high school at age 17, I was able to sign up for the concert band, which was the lower level classical group. And I was performing in the upper level classical group. So I was able to sign up for the lower level group as a teacher's aide, almost an assistant. Right. And part of that was learning score study and learning how to conduct different patterns and stuff like that.
Wow, that's great.
Another elective I signed up for was music theory. And as I said, Phil was building this program, and he was able to start an AP theory curriculum. And I was fortunate enough to be in one of the first classes for that. So, part of that was learning how to arrange and all that kind of stuff. And that made a big impact on me too. I would be a little bit remiss too to not talk about my buddy Johnny Lindsay. And Johnny I met when I went to high school originally as a 14-year-old. And Johnny he grew up in his church, in his Baptist church. And he was still is an outstanding musician, not just drummer. And he would play drums, bass, guitar, sing, whatever. And at school, he was playing drums mostly. And, everybody loved Johnny. Everybody loved his drumming. Everybody loved his antics and his attitude. And, he's a great guy. And as he and I got to know each other more through the music program, he was 2 years ahead of me. He started to invite me to play at his churches. And so I had no idea what I was doing. I just did whatever Johnny told me to do. But he was very into that, the Baptist gospel style.
Okay, got it.
The church quartets.
Right. Yeah.
And so he was starting a quartet of his own at his church, and they needed a drummer. And
that's great.
there I was, this Jewish boy from New York, touring all these,
it was a black church.
It was, yeah.
Okay.
Everybody catching the Holy Spirit, and
right?
Running around. Everything. And it was a blast. And, through that experience, we had a gig in Harlem. We drove up to New York and played a church in Harlem. And they told us not to bring any gear. They said they had all the gear. And, this was my first lesson in always bring your own gear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we get to the church and I look at the stage. First of all, the stage is set up in such a way that the whole band is down in front, kind of near the congregation. But the church the drum set was way up, like, levels, tiers behind the band. So I was a distance away. And I get up there and I cram myself behind this, drum set. And I look around and the heads are, 10 years old. And the floor tom's being held up by a chair.
And the pedal's going a different direction.
It is. And we start and we're playing and all of a sudden the bass drum pedal falls apart and the cymbal falls down and Johnny's looking at me like, play louder. And I'm like, I don't have drums, man. I don't know what to tell you.
That's funny.
So yeah, that was about a year of my life. And that was my first experience really gigging.
Yeah.
And being part of a group outside of school that was, charged with sustaining itself and finding rehearsal time and finding people and gear and gigs. And, and, Johnny had a big impact on me then.
That's
an impressionable teenager.
Sure. Again, going back to some of these other conversations I've had, it's fascinating to see how we develop into having these, worst way of putting it, garage bands and these experiences either in church or other groups that you were playing in. And then, but it's necessary for that growth for you to move forward. And like you said, you learned that lesson and you move forward to know, okay, I got to bring my own drum set, be prepared. So now after high school, where does your journey head to?
Yeah. So after high school, and we're skipping a lot of people, and maybe we can go back and talk about some more of them.
No, add what you want. This is fun.
Okay. Yeah. So I am going to stay in high school for just a moment.
Sure.
This was a large period of growth for me. And so, I had all the school groups. I had Phil, and that is, that can't be understated, the impact all of that had. A huge impact that I had, or that had on me, was the Junkyard Gang. The Junkyard Gang was, I'm not talking about Bill Cosby's Junkyard Gang, although our name was inspired by that. It was a ska band that we started when I was 14 in 9th grade. And it was me and another cousin of mine, not the one that taught me drum set, but a different cousin who played bass, and my friend, Ben, we call him BJ. Right. And we had 2 horn players and we wrote our own songs. I should say BJ wrote his own songs and we played them. Yeah. And it was a time, man. It was 3 or 4 years of just being teenagers and playing in a garage style ska band, gigging around town, and and I will say, through that, meeting BJ and getting to know him, he's now my best friend. He was the best man at my wedding. We talk almost every day, and we have all these memories of the Junkyard Gang. And it was another style of music that I could put in my cap, feather that I could put in my cap, and it was something I wasn't familiar with before that.
Right.
But my cousin John and my friend BJ were very into that style at the time. BJ was a year older than me, and he was already in a punk group called Skokie. And Skokie had a following. They were, it was 3 kids from 2 from my school, 1 kid from another school, and they would play, and they had a following of however many kids that would go to their different shows at houses or wherever. And BJ was at the time, the stereotypical 15-year-old. He had, long black hair that like covered his eyes.
Right.
And he would wear a black beanie cap, and he never smiled. And he walked up to me and he was like, I had never seen him before. And he was like, hey, you want to be in my ska band. And I was like, I didn't know what ska was. I was like,
yeah, I was
sure.
going to ask you. Yeah.
I was like, sure, I'll be in your band.
Now, let me stop you for a minute. For
Yeah,
those that are listening, audience, give us an example. What is ska?
I like to think of ska as like a combination of reggae and punk. Okay. You can also think of it maybe as like a faster reggae, a lighter punk style music. Okay. And it almost always has horns. And so, that began a whole new road for me. So I had the churches and I had the school groups, and now I have this ska path. And good examples of that would be, Real Big Fish was a really big band that I was listening to at the time. And, John and BJ were listening to all these other groups, Less Than Jake. And now I'm blanking on all of them. But those are two really good examples of, if you want to listen to the type of music the Junkyard Gang was going for. And we, garnered our own following. There was, John was a visual artist as well. He was really into that. He went on to get degrees in that. And he designed merchandise for us. We had t-shirts and albums and stuff like that. And John would do the artwork for all of that. And our t-shirt was this bright blue, royal blue, whatever t-shirt with this orange monster, like neon orange monster that John designed. And it said the Junkyard Gang. And I knew that we had a following because I would walk around school and kids would be wearing this shirt. And I never saw those kids before. And I was like, well, that's cool. Like, I guess I could keep doing this. And so, yeah, it was a great time. And, Grandma would let us practice in her basement, or we would go to BJ's house or the trumpet player's house. And it was another safe space where I was able to be myself and play music. And, it really took me to the next level in that way. You
had a taste of, this is something I can get used to, not only just the music, but at that age, and I mean, we're all there, it's great to be accepted by your peers. And and not only, we're not even getting to the point of down the road, my question, but being to see how that music makes you feel at the time when you're playing in front of an audience and so forth. And you can actually visually see that people are enjoying something that you're producing.
Yes.
In
real time. Right?
In real time.
There's no waiting for it. There's no there's no disconnect, right? It's everybody's there at the same time. So
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a communication too, because what they're feeling, they're either dancing, moving, they're giving you that feeling back. That's a great thing about music. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So now what happens? You got the band going, and then I wanted, before you go on, you talked about style. You're playing on the set. You're gathering all this information in your head. At what age are you still at this? At 17, 18, give or take?
Still high school age. So
high school age.
Depending on which of the various topics I brought up, we're still between ages 14 and 17.
Okay. So now you're getting all this different information of rhythms, style of playing on the drums, and you're having inventory of this music. That's really setting the seed of what kind of musician you're going to be as you become a young adult. Yes.
Absolutely. And not only do I have an inventory of music, I have an inventory of people reacting to music. Yeah. And seeing my uncle react to Jimi Hendrix, similarly to my grandma reacting to Italian opera, to my mom reacting to the music of when she was younger, and so I'm able to see how different musics can affect people in the same ways, or in different ways. And it really developed not only my abilities, but also my appreciation and my interest for these things. And so going into college, I felt you know, we always kind of try to differentiate ourselves from our peers a little bit. And I think the one thing I can confidently say is that I feel like I have always appreciated all different musics the same.
Yeah.
And I have seen peers actively, you know, not be interested in certain genres or styles, maybe because it didn't resonate with them, or maybe because they had a negative experience or
Sure.
what have you. But because I've had almost only positive experiences with all of these genres, you know, it really helped me develop an appreciation for all musics.
Yes.
And so going into college, you know, I had that, and that was important.
So now, as you're going into college, was there any question on whether you're going to go into music or become a dentist? Or
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And you know, I will say I've struggled with this a little bit in my adult life. The fact that I never really gave myself a chance to experience anything else. But there was so much reward and so much coming from music that I never felt lacking.
Sure.
And so going into college, the only discussion was, am I majoring in performance or am I majoring in education?
Right.
And,
the
you know,
big question.
Right. And Phil was there. Phil was there to, you know, give us sage counsel and wisdom. And, you know, it was a big discussion. And ultimately I decided on education, which I'm very thankful for. So,
yeah. So, you know, that's kind of interesting. Let's talk about that fork in the road, so to speak, because a lot of us get to that point. And you were performing a lot. Was it that proverbial, well, you have something to fall back on kind of conversation? Or did you feel like an urge that, you know, you wanted to hand this knowledge to other people? For me, I wanted to be a music teacher more than the performance on stage, whereas my son felt totally different on that. So,
and still does, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, the needle is starting to move a little bit.
Okay.
With Jared. But do you remember that way of train of thinking that you had back then?
Yeah. So, like I said, I had a team of parents.
Yes.
And we, you know, decisions were almost always made together. And whether it was together between them or together with me included. You know. And so this decision, I definitely was a part of. And, you know, my family and also felt close to Phil. And so he was brought in on that decision as well. And I'd be lying if I told you I was 17 and was eager to be a teacher. I saw the hours Phil was putting in. I saw, you know, I come from a family of teachers, and I see the hours that they work and the job that they have to do, and it did not feel appealing to me. And so it was a decision of, look, you want to perform? That's great. You should be an education major because you will have that to fall back on. And I'm grateful for that because I still feel like I got all the things I would have gotten out of a performance degree.
Sure.
But in addition to that, I had a bona fide, you know, teacher certificate that I could just walk into any interview with and be ready to go. And the school that I went to, Towson University, was and is acclaimed for being a great teacher school. And so, you know, I left that school with strong skills to be able to teach, and I used them. And I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, sure. We all know, and I've said this before in other episodes, you cannot have a band and start a band without a strong drummer and bass. You got to have that bass and drums.
The foundation, for sure.
Yeah, you know, so
for sure.
That's amazing. So you're in college there. You're going through with your classes, and what's going on with your playing at that time? You're playing in, of course, the university ensembles.
Yeah, so at Towson, I was in my element. I felt very, I felt comfortable in that I was in this situation that I was very happy.
Sure.
I didn't feel comfortable in my abilities. I always felt challenged, and I always felt like I need to do better at this. I need to do better at this. The teachers that we had were really good at exposing us to life as a musician, and to also to different musicians who were successful. And I was able to see, like, okay, if I'm going to do this, like, I need to be able to play like that.
Right.
And it was cool being in Baltimore because we were near Peabody too. And so we would have, students from Peabody come and give us clinics and stuff like that. Professional musicians as well. One name that really sticks in my mind was Svet Stoyanov, who is now the percussion professor at University of Miami.
Okay.
And he, at the time, was a very young student at Peabody. Phenomenal marimba player, absolutely phenomenal marimba soloist. And as a percussion student, at the time, as a percussion student in college, studying the marimba was a huge thing. Marimba solos and being in ensembles with marimba. And it was, I don't think it was a fad. I think they're still doing it, but it was a big deal. And so everybody was in love with playing marimba solos and acquiring new solos and commissioning new solos. And here was Svet Stoyanov coming and giving us a clinic on solos that we were familiar with.
Right.
And he would come in, and I remember there was one, I don't remember what the solo was, but one of my fellow students performed for Svet in a masterclass. And I remember he performed the solo, and Svet claimed, at least, that he had never heard it before. And my friend performed it, and Svet went up and just performed it right back for him. And I was like,
wow,
blown away. I was like, clearly we're not just talking about percussion or marimba playing. We're talking about musicianship.
Right.
And I found that, the greatest percussionists, and this is true for any instrument, the greatest instrumentalists are also the greatest musicians, and can speak through music, not just necessarily their own instruments.
Sure.
And so like music theory always came, kind of easily to me. Ear training was something I had to work out a little bit, but I was willing to put in the work for that because I see people like Svet. And, I knew that, like, in order to get to where I'm going, I had to bolster all of these other skills, not just my playing. And I was heavily invested in that. I was, pouring my soul into my musicianship at Towson. And, there were other hardships that were going on outside of school that were distracting or, otherwise needed my attention. But it always came back to the practice room. And I remember, sleeping in practice rooms and hanging out in practice rooms and, doing all that stuff and, spending hours and hours of my life inside in windowless rooms with a marimba, or snare drum or whatever, just getting better. One of my most influential teachers, Mark Craig, gave me, there's so many Mark Craig stories, but there's one, he gave me an hour-long lesson on triangle. Like, look, you got to learn how to play this instrument well, so we're going to do it.
Right.
And it was funny. It was, there's a Black Eyed Peas tune that has a triangle in it. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I know that, but part of the lesson was playing triangle along with the Black Eyed Peas recording. And he would critique my playing and say, look, your sound isn't consistent or your time isn't consistent. And it was an hour long of just that. And then another hour later of tambourine, and then another hour later of whatever. And, I learned to deeply invest in any instrument that I was going to play, whether it was rain stick or orchestral timpani, and approaching them similarly. And Towson really taught me that. Yes. I didn't grow up with private instruction. I didn't have private teachers until my 12th grade year.
Yes.
And so having private instruction at the university was a whole new world for me. Having the one-on-one, we're going to talk about you and your playing.
Right.
It was the first time that I wasn't in a situation where I was, I was the best. You know what I mean?
Right.
The first time I was in a situation where I was really vulnerable with my playing, and I could see how personal music was.
Right. Right.
And Mark was a big, perpetuator of showing me that. He was able to show me that regularly. Yes. And he was the kind of teacher that, nothing was ever good enough, right? I'd show up as prepared as I could, and it was still like, yeah, but you messed this up. It's like, okay, back to the practice room. Right. And the whole team there's Mark Craig. At the time, it was Mark Craig. Dr. Patrick Roulette was the percussion department head. Amazing educator and percussionist with a wealth of experience that he brought to Towson. And Michelle Humphreys, who's the percussionist that I purchased my first marimba from, and also became my private teacher. Right. We had, Frank Russo, we had, and Scott Robinson, who was an amazing musician and studied Southern Indian music. So he knew all of the syllables and all of the frame drumming and all that kind of stuff. Right. And Dr. Roulette had gone to Ghana to study Gil and Panloko and some of the other instruments. And it was a big part of our study was all of these musics from all around the world. And we could actually put our hands on it now, right? And when I was younger, I was listening to it on the radio with my dad. And now at Towson, I'm here and I'm like putting my hands on this music and touching it and feeling it and playing it and learning about it. And it just, it was eye-opening. It was awakening.
Yeah. Yes. That you were swimming in the pool of percussion. I want to mention this too. Our audience, there are some of us that don't know that you literally have to study, and you've worked on those other instruments, just not the drum set, the triangle, the cymbal, where to hit. I mean, look, I pick up my sax, could be alto, tenor, soprano, bari, what have you, reeds, clarinet. But the percussion is, you've got to take that wood block out and have an idea of how to strike it.
Yes. And what mallet is going to work the best? Which wood block is going to work the best for this piece of music?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So now you're going through, you're swimming in college and trying to work your way through. And now you're trying to decide what you're going to do after college. What happens?
Yeah. So academia is a funny thing for an art, right? And, you look through history, so many different musicians that didn't go to school for music. They learned on the street or learned from their friends or whatever. And so now we have this whole industry around educating music.
Exactly.
And, that's a discussion for another day. But when you're in when you're in academia, it almost feels like the goal is to keep you in academia.
Yeah.
And it felt like originally, okay, you're going to finish this degree. You're going to go get your next degree, maybe even a doctorate after that. And then you're going to go teach.
Right.
And there was, at the school at Towson, it was such a teacher-centric, education-centric program that's the path that was laid out before many of us graduating from there. Whether you graduate and go teach right away at a public school, or you graduate and go get a degree and go teach at a university or whatever it is. So I never really put much thought into what was going to happen after graduating my undergraduate degree, my Bachelor of Science degree. I always knew that the next step was a master's degree. It was just a matter of where and what do I want to study. And so I did an extra year at Towson because I enjoyed the groups so much and I wanted to play more. And because I was doing that, I was taking less classes in other areas to fulfill the credits that I needed. And so it required a fifth year of study. And so I did my fifth year, and here we are, fifth year of school. I've already done my senior recital. I've done, all of my playing requirements are over, and now I'm heavy into the teaching part of it. I'm into, classes on how to teach students with special needs, classes on how to teach elementary students or secondary students, and all the observation classes that go with that. So traveling to different schools and watching teachers teach. And it was at this point that I was also preparing for graduate school auditions because, like I said, that was the next logical step for me.
I see.
And as I was preparing, we were in our elementary school placements. So we were observing our elementary school teachers. I was so lucky to be placed with a teacher at Westhausen Elementary School who was just phenomenal. He was so amazing at his job, teaching elementary school music to instrumental music to elementary schoolers. I was just able to just see this was how it was done, right? This was the right answer. Yeah. And one of my classmates, Jane, was also at Westhausen, and she was a vocal general focused degree student. And so she was studying that, and she was in a separate classroom. I was in for all intents and purposes, the janitor closet with the music students, the instrumental music students. Because as many of your listeners may or may not know, instrumental music in elementary school is a low priority. So low that typically there's not classrooms for it. Typically
I was in the cafeteria.
Yeah, exactly. And so my mentor teacher was doing his thing, but it was in a janitor closet. And I had to leave the closet to go through my classmate Jane's classroom to make copies or do whatever I needed to do. And I was busy. I was doing the observing thing. I was teaching. I was preparing for grad school auditions and all this stuff. And Jane was preparing for her senior recital. And she was performing this French piece. I'm forgetting the name of it, but it was for vocal solo with string quartet and piano. And she needed it down a whole step. And it was a 9-minute saga, as many classical pieces are. And she needed someone to arrange it, basically. Transcribe it and arrange it. Because once you bring it down a whole step, that affects, what the string voices are doing. And now you need an arranger to resituate all of that. And I will say this, Jane was absolutely breathtakingly gorgeous. And so I walked through the classroom to make my copies, and here's Jane, and she goes, "Hey, are you any good at Sibelius or Finale?" And in my head, I was like, "You got to say no, because you're doing too many other things. You got to get into grad school. Like this, you can't do this. You can't take this on." And out of my mouth, I was like, "Yeah, I'm great at Sibelius." And so I spent the weekend, literally the weekend, I don't know, 36, 48 hours arranging this piece so that she could start rehearsals on it on Monday. And it was fine. It worked well, and she was able to perform it, and I was able to go to the rehearsals and make sure that the instrumentalists had what they need, or the parts looked the way they wanted to. And because Jane and I were in the same classes, we were at the same elementary school, we were doing this thing together, we started spending a lot of time together. And I'll fast forward and just say that we are happily married now with 2 kids.
I was waiting for that.
But there it is again, music giving me another wonderful memory and experience that I'm just eternally grateful for.
Plus, she has a full-time arranger anytime she needs.
That's right. And you know what? She used it too. She used it hard.
I love it. That's great. That's great. That's a great story. I love it. So you now, I was going to ask you, when you were going through your story there, was there any time before you started your student teaching that you felt, this is a waste of my time. I don't want to teach. I really just want to play. Was there another fork in the road, or were you full steam ahead?
There wasn't really a fork in the road. I will say that choosing the education path kind of brought me deeper into education. While I was at Towson was about 45 minutes or an hour away from where I went to high school. And so Phil basically hired me as the percussion tech for the marching band.
Oh, cool.
And so I would go on, Tuesdays and Thursdays back down to the high school, teach the students there, and start building my voice as a teacher.
Sure.
And that exposure kind of, drew me deeper into it. I was able to take on a couple private students here and there, younger students, but still able to, develop that voice even more. And by the time I got to student teaching, I thought like, I really could be a band director. Like I could see myself doing that for the stability of it. And also, I felt like I was confident that I was good at it.
Yeah.
Of course I had more to learn, but I felt when I was teaching in front of students and stuff like that, I felt comfortable. I felt like I was getting done what I wanted to get done. And, so yeah, by the time I graduated Towson, teaching was definitely a professional possibility for me, for sure.
So you're on your way to grad school, and where do you end up at?
Yeah, so full stop, actually. I'm on my way to grad school, and I don't get in. And, this was, I had other failures leading up to this, many minor failures here and there at Towson, not getting into groups or not performing a certain way or, being told certain things. And this was the first real, like, holy crap, what am I going to do now moment. And so this was the this was the semester I was graduating Towson. I met Jane in the fall, and then January, I had an opportunity to travel to Ghana. And this was a beautiful, wonderful experience that I would not trade for anything. My friend who I actually went to high school with was also at Towson, and he was connected through a professor to this Montessori school in Ghana. And the professor knew that my friend was an extremely talented musician. His name is Donald Walcott. He's also a teacher now, but always, just a naturally talented, able piano player and guitar player and singer and bass player and drummer. And he's just another one of those people in my life who showed me that, music is as important as drumming. And so, Donnie hired, I should say recruited myself and BJ from who we know in this podcast from the story of the Junkyard Gang. And so the three of us traveled to Ghana. And I will say BJ and I were quite skeptical of this. And it took months of convincing on Donnie's part to get us to go there. But the mission was to start a music program, a Western music program at this Montessori school for kindergarten. It was basically K through 12 age students. And it was a 3-week trip, and we were there and we ran classes on music theory. Donnie brought me along because I had the education background, which meant I had all of the method classes. So I knew how to play all the different instruments through like a 5th grade level, which is like, we're talking like London Bridge, right? Like I could play London Bridge on anything. And so I was able to teach, I brought the book that I was comfortable with, the method book, and the school bought all these instruments for the kids.
That's great.
And we went out there for 3 weeks and taught them about music and taught, the teachers, this is what it looks like. And we performed for them. We taught them. And it was just so memorable and so wonderful to be there. And the reason I say I wouldn't trade it for anything is because when I got back, I realized I spent all of January not practicing for grad school auditions.
Whoops.
And I only applied to 4 schools, and they were good schools. And, auditions were coming up in less than 30 days. And it was just, I knew like it wasn't going to happen. And so I tried. Of course, I had the auditions scheduled. The applications were in. I had, poured myself into this. And I wasn't going to give up on it, but I knew that it was going to be a stretch. And so, of course, by the end of that semester before graduating Towson, I knew I wasn't going to grad school anywhere that next year. And so over the summer I was able to pick up a full-time public school instrumental music job at one of the districts in Maryland.
Great.
And it was great. I was able to find employment in my degree at something that I enjoyed. And that teaching experience really opened my eyes to the fact that I did not want to be a teacher. It's those of your listeners who are teachers know, or who were teachers even more so, they know that 3 to 5% of your job as a music teacher is teaching music, and the other 95 to 97% is the well-being of the child, appeasing the parents, making sure the school's on board. The district I was in was not an affluent district, and I always saw myself in that role, being able to influence people. And it just wasn't working. I don't know if it was because I was too young, or I just wasn't emotionally invested enough in the profession, but it was a very challenging year. And so that spring, my undergraduate professor, Dr. Roulette, emailed me and said there's an assistantship open at University of New Mexico. And the reason he knew that is because, first of all, he's a college professor and they all talk to each other and they all know what's going on. But second, the professor at UNM, Scott Ney, went to school with my professor, with Dr. Roulette. I think they went to Boston together. And so they knew each other. And I had auditioned at Towson for my graduate degree, and awkwardly enough did not get in. But that audition also was a discussion for another day. And so Dr. Roulette emails me and says that this assistantship is open at University of New Mexico. And my whole world changed. It was like, okay, I have a door to go to where I want to go, and where I wanted to go originally. And I had heard about University of New Mexico. It wasn't totally under the radar. We were going to, professional development sessions like Maryland Music Educators Association conferences and stuff like that. Sure. And there were other teachers that had graduated Peabody and then went to UNM, or graduated here and then went to UNM. And so I had heard of University of New Mexico, and it started to become appealing to me. And the fact that an assistantship opened there while I was hearing about it was just pure coincidence. But after researching the school a little bit, I got really excited about it. It was going to be the first time that I was away from Maryland, living away from Maryland, doing my profession and my job and my life away from Maryland. And that in and of itself was appealing. And then on top of it, knowing all the professors had gone to these schools like Indiana or Juilliard or Eastman, or I was like, well, I don't have to go to those schools. If these guys went there, I could just learn from them. And I did. And I went to UNM. I would have been 22 at the time. And I asked Jane to move with me. We were not married yet. And for her, it was an easy decision, but for her family, I think it was a little bit hard. I think her dad said something like, "You're not moving unless you got a ring." And
who is this
guy? With me. Yeah, exactly. And so we moved to New Mexico. We drove across the country in a truck and towed our car behind us and moved out there and I started my studies, and I was there for 2 years, and it was amazing. I really thrived there. I think because I was so emotionally invested in it, and it was performing, and it was where I was happy. I was back in my element. I wasn't teaching. I didn't have to worry about, the well-being of my students. It was a lot of focus on me and my peers and our music. And that's really where I wanted to be. A lot of people in history were able to accomplish this on their own. And you hear stories of artists and musicians and whatever moving to big cities, right? And establishing themselves in big cities and meeting people and all this stuff. I did not I'm a little bit introverted, and I didn't really have the facility to do that.
Right.
In my mind, in my brain. I felt like if I moved to a big city, it would just be too overwhelming for me.
Right.
And I needed academia to give that to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was able to go to UNM and find that there and rejoin all of the, the groups that I love performing in and pick up some more. I was able to finally, dig into jazz a little bit.
Right.
I did one semester in jazz combo and started to fall in love with it there. But, not mostly, I should say almost exclusively, all of my training in music through both of my degrees was classical music.
Right.
It was classical percussion, large ensemble, and chamber ensemble groups. And that was my passion. And I really, really loved that. And it wasn't until after grad school that I found a love for commercial music and drum set. So.
But education or music educator wasn't done with you yet.
It wasn't. It wasn't. And so
where did you go?
Yeah. So after UNM, I graduated UNM, and it was always a goal of mine, a personal goal of mine, to have my master's degree and also be in my career before starting a family. And so immediately after graduating UNM, Jane and I got married. And so we were married in Maryland, but we were still living in New Mexico. And then I was like, okay, I'm married now. I need a job. And so the job that was most readily available and one that I was most excited about was Rio Rancho School District. And I was hired to be the band director at Eagle Ridge Middle School there. Mm-hmm. And I was very excited about it. And the reason I was excited about it is because during my time at UNM, I was also the marching band drumline instructor at Rio Rancho High School.
Okay.
And so I built a rapport with the band director there and the band director at Rio Rancho Middle School. And for those of you who know, Rio Rancho was a small school district. I think there's only 2 high schools there. I don't know if that's still true, but when I was there, they just opened their second high school. Right. And so there were 4 middle schools, 2 high schools, and it was easy to meet everybody quickly. Right. And I did. And I built a rapport with them, and it was great. And so when it came time to graduate and find a job, the job at Eagle Ridge was opening. And I interviewed for it, and I was able to get that job. Great. And the job was a part-time position because they just didn't have enough students. Right. And so the way that the district worked it out for me is that they were able to create this percussion specialist position for me. And so in the mornings, I would be at Eagle Ridge Middle School teaching band, which I absolutely loved. I loved teaching middle school band, and those kids were amazing. Yes. And their passion for music was amazing. And I barely had to do anything except show them, like, here's the piece of music we're playing, and this is what we're going to rehearse. And from there, it was like, they took such ownership of it. It was beautiful. And in the afternoons, I would go to all the other schools in the district. Like I said, there weren't very many. Right. And I would give percussion master classes or private lessons to the students at each other school. Yes. And in that way, I was able to put together a full-time position. And it was great. I think that if I hadn't found my current career, I'd probably still be there or in a similar job. I really enjoyed working at that district. Everybody there is so passionate about teaching and music that it was such a fun place to be and an inspiring place to be. And I think it still is, based on what I know about who's still there. I think that, if I were to go back there, I would have the same feeling about it. Absolutely. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. And, all of these things, it wasn't exactly the path that I charted for myself, right? I wanted to go to school to be a percussionist, and I did, but afterwards I wasn't a percussionist, I was a teacher. And then after that, I was a percussionist finally at grad school. And then after that, I was like, well, I got to be a teacher again. And it's not really how I envisioned, my music career going. But I'm so thankful for each of those experiences because of the people that I met or the things I was able to do.
Absolutely.
And so it was during my time at Rio Rancho schools that I found my current career.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, Rio Rancho, absolutely. The programs are strong, and in 2024 now, the time of this podcast in February, and just great teaching going on there. So you would love it coming back and step into it like nothing's ever changed. Good
Awesome.
good music going on.
Yeah.
But then, my goodness, you find yourself heading into the Navy.
Join the Navy.
So before we get into the Navy part, you gave me a clip. I want to show this.
Absolutely.
To the audience. Can you set this up? Because it has some various pictures in there throughout your career. So can you talk about that for us?
Yeah. So the clip that we picked is an arrangement that I did of a Hanukkah tune. And it's funny that we picked a Hanukkah tune because it's February, right? But the truth of the matter is the career that I'm in, we don't record ourselves very much, and I don't perform solo very much anymore. We perform together live, and that's what we do. Yeah. And so finding a solo recording of myself it proved to be a little bit tricky, especially one that was relevant.
Sure.
I have a few videos on YouTube here and there, but of solos, but that's from years ago, and I wanted to find something a little bit more current. And so this clip is an arrangement I did while I was stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And we were in a unique position of having 4 percussionists. And that's almost unheard of in the Navy music program, the fleet bands.
Right.
Because of the way the fleet bands are structured, usually you'll have 3 or less. And so having 4 was like, we got to do something. Like something's got to happen. And so the holidays came around, and it's always come to my attention that we need some Hanukkah representation in our holiday music. Right. I was raised Jewish, and so I have that. I have that in the back of my head all the time.
Sure.
And so this was also unique in that it was during COVID, and so we weren't performing live. So we had 4 percussionists not performing live, making recordings, and we needed Hanukkah music. And so you'll hear this. It's an arrangement of Hanukkah, O Hanukkah, for xylophone solo with marimba trio accompaniment.
Cool.
And it's me performing on the xylophone and my 3 colleagues performing on marimbas.
Okay, let's take a look here. First of all, for those that are not familiar with xylophone, talk about that instrument.
So xylophone has its roots in traditional West African music from the Gil, and you can actually see it's almost like an impressionistic painting of the Gil here that I was able to get in Ghana. And the Gil is for our language, it's like a pentatonic tuned instrument where there are wooden bars laying next to each other, supported by a frame, and they have these gourds underneath that act as resonators. Yes. And the gourds have spider eggs in them to make like a little buzzy, distorted sound. The Gil is a super cool instrument. Yeah. And so the xylophone kind of came from Africa, and it is structured like a piano where you have accidentals that are the black keys on the piano, and then the naturals, which are the white keys on the piano. On the xylophone, they're all wooden bars, but it's formatted the same way. And you play it with mallets, and you can choose hard mallets or rubber mallets or anything in between, I guess, these days in the 2020s. But yeah, and it has a long history of appeal and I'll say appeal because back in the early 19th century, no, I'll say early 20th century, excuse me, there were xylophone solos and xylophone soloists, and like we're thinking kind of like the ragtime era, right? And it was a big deal back then, and it kind of stuck around, and it made its way into orchestral music and musicals and stuff like that. And now if you go audition for a symphony orchestra job or any job really, they're going to ask you for certain excerpts on the xylophone. But largely it's a wooden instrument that you hit with mallets. And I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah. Beautiful. You did a great job on that. What made you go into the Navy? Yeah.
So I grew up, it wasn't Rio Rancho. So I grew up in Maryland, right outside of DC, and DC has all of what we call the premier bands for all the different services. They have the Pershing Zone, they have the President's Own Marine Band, United States Navy Band in DC. And they were all right there. And, we would see them performing. Phil Barnes, my high school band director, would have airmen of note come out and play with us and give us clinics, which is the Air Force big band, the Air Force Jazz Band. And so military music was always on my radar. I always knew about it from an early age. And, Phil was vocal about the benefits of military music and what you can do with it. And so it was always in the back of my mind through my whole education. When I was at Rio Rancho teaching the marching band, the Marine recruiter would come by periodically to talk to the kids. And I caught him in the band director's office. We were all sitting in there before rehearsal one day, and I started just chatting with him about Marine music. And he was explaining to me his job and what he does and how it looks, and it sounded like it could be a cool thing. Until he started mentioning that he hadn't touched his horn in 6 months. And it's unique. It's different from Marines and Army and all that. Like if you become a Marine musician, it's not true that you won't touch your horn. You will play music all the time. In his particular case, he became a recruiter. And so because he did that, he wasn't playing music as much. But he was a musician. And so when he was done with recruiting duty, he was going to be stationed somewhere where he would play music again. So I was trying to pick his brain about, what military music was like, specifically Marine music. And I had decided to go audition. And then as I was getting into the reading a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that, I decided that Marines, if I was going to do military music, Marines was not the avenue for me. And that's various different reasons. If you are someone and you're listening to this who wants to follow military music, I suggest you look at all the different services because they all have their benefits. But for me, Marines was not the avenue. But after having that conversation and learning a little bit more about it, I was leaning a little bit more towards military music. And so I dug in a little bit more. Air Force and Navy really piqued my interest. I had a friend at UNM who had just won an Air Force job as a drummer, as a percussionist. And, you win this job, and if you do it well and you're a good employee, essentially, you can stay here and retire and get a pension and healthcare and all that. And I knew that. And so seeing my friend do it, I was like, well, that's definitely not out of the realm of possibility for me. Like, he's a phenomenal percussionist, and I felt like I could hang with him, and I was like, okay, don't get me wrong. There are plenty of things he does that I will never be able to do. But I felt like, it felt closer. Like it felt like more of a possibility. It wasn't so out of reach. And so joining the Navy, it really came down to duty stations. for me. And the Navy, being, the maritime force, was always near water, and that was the appeal for me. And so between that and the fact that the Air Force audition was going to require much more energy and much more time and many more resources that I didn't have for me to prepare for it, I decided to just go out for the Navy.
Right.
And so I auditioned in November of my teaching year in Rio Rancho at Navy Band Southwest, which was located in San Diego. The structure of Navy Band auditions is different now. Back then, we would go to the closest band. And for me, it was Navy Band San Diego, or Southwest, excuse me, in San Diego. I was able to go play, and the feedback I got was, whether or not you win this job, here are the things that we heard and didn't hear. Right? The things that we were lacking, the things that you did well, all that kind of stuff. It was almost like a private lesson. And it was awesome. And so 2 weeks later, I got the call that I won the job, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I was driving my car and I was like, this is amazing. I already knew that as much as I enjoyed the job in Rio Rancho teaching, that was not the profession that I wanted to spend the next 20 or 30 years in.
How long did you stay in Rio Rancho?
It was only a year.
Oh, okay.
And if you count the time before that as the marching band drumline instructor, where I was doubling at UNM and doing that, maybe 2 years, 2.5 years.
Okay.
So yeah, I knew, after I graduated UNM, I was like, let me give this teaching thing another shot. And I still didn't feel the passion that I felt when I was playing. And so I went, auditioned for the Navy, got the job, told Jane, and we decided together that this was it. This was going to be what we wanted to do. And a big part of it is that the Navy provides us as a family the ability to live the life that we want to live. I wanted to play music and make a career out of it, and I'm doing that. And Jane always wanted to stay home with the kids and be with them. And she still teaches private piano lessons. And she likes to sing in choirs. She was singing in the New Mexico Philharmonic Chorus and all that kind of stuff. And she still has music as part of her life as well. But she always wanted to stay home. And I was like, how is a drummer, percussionist going to make that happen? Right. And the Navy has done that for us. And
that's great.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful, 8 years almost.
First of all, thank you for your service and your wife's service and your family, your wonderful children there, because it's not just the person that's going there, it's the whole family. And we do appreciate that for what you're doing for us there. And so thank you so much. Let's talk about, before I let you go, the feeling of music and what it does for you. Like we said, in our audience, we have people, of course, that play, but just listen. And as you're moving forward, how does the music feel for you in your life when you're playing, in your soul, when you're playing behind the drum set or the xylophone? What does it do for you as a person?
It's cathartic. It's like a therapy. Some people go to church. Some people go, I also find this actually when I'm out in nature. If it's, quiet and I'm hiking or something, it's an inner peace. Chaos kind of fades. It's that feeling. And it's important for me to preserve that. There's so many people who haven't found that for themselves. And I was so fortunate to almost be born with it, and find it at such an early age and have it so nurtured. And that's what it is for me personally. I would say, artists have this, we have a need, almost a craving for a reward, right? We need to be rewarded in some way, right? Whether it's like, I've created this beautiful piece of music or this beautiful artwork, and that's my reward, or I got a standing ovation at this performance, or I performed this piece perfectly, or whatever it is. We need to have some kind of reward for us to know that we are making an impact of some kind, right? And so, aside from my personal reasons for doing music, the reward I find comes from uplifting those around me. And the Navy provides me with those people for me to uplift. And so whether I'm performing a military ceremony or performing for a community in the Philippines or in Palau or wherever, my ability to perform music with colleagues at a high level uplifts those that are listening to me. And that's the reward that I find. If I perform and I don't get a round of applause, I'm not really affected by that. Because like I said, I have that inner peace that, that and the reward of uplifting others. Performing a ceremony, like, we perform ceremonies all the time for people who are retiring or, changing their command over to somebody else. And a lot of times these people had never heard the military band perform or were there performing for them. And that's a big deal. Like I perform whatever march you want to put out there. I perform it 20 times a year or 50 times a year or whatever. But each time I perform it, it's new for someone else. And that is such a big deal to me. And, music, although it's become kind of a day job for me almost, the feeling it gives me hasn't waned at all. And so
that's good.
Even though I do that, I'm able to hold on to that.
Yeah.
And, if we're talking about, why should others continue to play or listen? We kind of alluded to this earlier. Music, and I've seen this with my own eyes, music is the ultimate communicator. There's no other way of communicating that reaches the level of communication that music does. And because of that, every person in the world should have the ability to react and relate to others through music. And it's the way that all of humanity is connected through all eras, through all generations, through all cultures. It transcends everything. And music, it can reach everybody. And so the only way to develop that skill is to keep listening or keep playing.
And it's intimate. It's something that can make you cry, make you laugh, joy, and sad, maybe almost within measures.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey man, I want to thank you so much for taking the time and doing what you're doing. I really appreciate you playing for our country and providing and also listening to your journey, how you really didn't have a choice in the matter. When you were born, your grandmother, she said, hey, this is going to be it. I don't know how it's going to happen, but this is going to be it. If he listens to us all, the village will point him in the right direction. God bless you and your wonderful wife and your children. What are your children's names?
Noah and Vera.
All right. God bless them. Thank you so much. And if you're listening to and watching this podcast, we all collectively say thank you and wish you the best in your future as you move forward there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your invitation. It's been a pleasure being here.
It was fun. And listen, everybody that's listening, go out, play all the right notes and enjoy the music. Thanks again.
You've been listening to The Podium. If you would like to be a guest on The Podium, email the show at onthepodium2@gmail.com. That's ONTHEPODIUMTOO @gmail.com.